Okay, thank you. Good morning. We've had
Good evening, participants. In a few minutes, we are going to start our session. Mr. Raj Samani is also joined, and many participants also joined. Just I'm doing a test now. If you are able to hear my audio, please chat window, you can say okay. Thank you. I could see many people are saying okay. Thank you.
Hi, I'm testing audio. Can everybody hear me okay? Ah, fantastic. Okay. Thank you, Abhijit and Vivek. Perfect. Okay. I'm sitting up, so hopefully the camera is a lot better. Let's see. Camera's not. There we go. Okay. Okay, okay. Sorry, I think I'm going to introduce me first, and then I'll unmute.
Good evening, participants. I am Shilo Rao, General Manager, National E-Governance Division. Now we are going to have an interesting session on WannaCry ransom threat. Let me introduce you the speaker of today's webinar session. Mr. Raj Samani is an international computer security expert, currently working as a chief scientist in McAfee, and he's also McAfee Fellow, currently located at London, UK. We are very thankful to Mr. Raj for giving his valuable time today. Though he is very occupied and having a tight schedule, he agreed to take a session, and I'm very happy to have him here. Thank you, Raj, for making part of this session. And I also add some credentials to Mr. Raj. Mr. Raj is actually assisted multiple law enforcement agencies in cybercrime cases, and he is a special advisor to European Cybercrime Center, EC3 at Hague. And he has been recognized for his contribution to computer security industry through numerous awards, including InfoSecurity Europe Hall of Fame, Peter Soss Award, Intel Achievement Award. He also authored several books, Applied Cybersecurity and Smart Grid, CSA Guide to Cloud Computing, as well as a technical editor for numerous publications. So before Raj taking over, I request Shalini to just give some housekeeping instructions to the participants. Then we can pass on to much awaited session with Raj Samani. Thank you, Raj, once more time. Shalini, can you just give brief housekeeping instructions to the participants?
Very good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for taking out time for attending this webinar. There are just few housekeeping rules we wanted to share with you. We would request, in case of any technical glitches, you may put your query in the chat box available at your screen. At the end of the session, you may put across your questions and queries related to the webinar, which we will be addressing during the last 15 minutes of the webinar. This session is getting live stream on YouTube as well. So in case any of your colleague is not able to view it here on webinar on this platform, they may search for Digital India Learning Portal on YouTube and watch this webinar. Over to the speaker now.
Raj, you can take on now. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. I hope this Friday is a lot quieter than last Friday, because at around about this time, there were some reports coming in of ransomware infections. Initially, they began in Southern Europe, but as we began to learn, ransomware attacks began attacking organizations. Well, initially we heard reports of attacks in the United Kingdom, but as you'll see in this particular presentation, the issue of WannaCry ransomware actually has been an issue right across the globe. So today we're going to talk about what is WannaCry, but I think more importantly, we're going to discuss and maybe even propose some considerations about some particular differences between WannaCry as opposed to other ransomware variants that we've seen. So let's get started. Just to put things into perspective, on the Friday, actually last week, when we learned of issues attacking the National Health Service in the United Kingdom, the impact for WannaCry was really quite staggering. This was actually a comment that we managed to pick up, as you can see, at 18 minutes past 4 on Friday. And what we were hearing was that actually the impact of the ransomware infection was having a direct impact upon patients. And I think that's an important thing to note. And the reason that I start off with this is that, I'm sure many of you are coming from a technical perspective, but, from a policy perspective and from a government perspective, there needs to be the recognition that when we talk about cybersecurity or cybercrime, this is not a IT issue. It's not an IT problem. It's not about malware or ransomware. It's actually making a direct impact into citizens. And it's the recognition of that I feel hasn't really been raised actually ever before. And what's been I think what's been most noticeable about WannaCry, and we're going to go through the technical bits and pieces just shortly. But more importantly, what we have here is we have an issue in which there is clear recognition that a cyber attack has a direct and detrimental impact upon society at large. Now, this is just the example for the NHS, but the WannaCry attack actually impacted more than just, say, for example, the health sector. The impact was right across multiple sectors and across multiple geographies. And even today, those organizations that have been hit are still in the process of trying to restore and recover systems. So if anything, what WannaCry should hopefully teach us is that this is not an IT issue. This is an issue with regards to our critical infrastructure or even an attack on our way of life. So what makes WannaCry so particularly different? And actually, why was it such a big issue? Because to be fair, ransomware has actually been, well, I think it began over nearly 30 years ago. And so it's something that certainly we as a cybersecurity company, and actually for those of you working in cybersecurity, we've certainly known about for a number of years. But what was particularly, I think, particularly issue with WannaCry was, well, first of all, of course, when we talk about ransomware, it was intended to impact the availability of data to those victims. And what ransomware basically does is that if you imagine, the front door to your house, you have a single key to lock and unlock to allow you in. Well, with ransomware, what they do is you have two separate keys, for example, one to lock your house and one to unlock your house. And in this particular instance, they locked the house. In other words, they locked the data. And anybody that wanted to get access to that data had to have the special key to unlock that. And of course, they get a message on their screen, as you can see on the right-hand side. And on that right-hand side, it tells you that unless you actually pay, and as you can see, $300 worth of Bitcoin, which is a virtual currency, then they're not going to give you your data back. And that's the basic premise of ransomware generally. We will lock your data, and unless you give us some money, we're not going to give it back. But why WannaCry was why the impact was so significant was, by and large, ransomware is generally operated and generally delivered through things such as email. In other words, there is a degree of user interaction required. In other words, if I get an email and I click on a link, then if that link takes me, or if it's a malicious link, then of course they can install ransomware onto my system. But why WannaCry was so different was, in this particular instance, there was no user interaction required. They were actually using a remote code exploit. So in other words, they were able to get direct access into these systems and then install ransomware onto those. That, of course, brings us back to where we were maybe kind of 10 to 15 years ago. For those of you that may remember, but we had malware such as Nimda or Blaster, and these were worms. In other words, there was no user interaction required, and they would just go out and infect and spread throughout the world. And that's exactly what we saw with WannaCry. It was a call to maybe where we were just over a decade or so ago. And that's, I suspect, that's been one of the biggest differences with regards to this. And that's actually part of the reason why what we saw on Friday was this I guess these warnings coming out whereby we're hearing of organizations and countries being hit, and it was significant in terms of just the number of incidents that we were picking up all across the globe. And this is the scale of the impact. As you can see, almost every country across the world had significant number of infections. And this wasn't an isolated scenario in terms of operating over a couple of weeks or a couple of months, but using data, and I'll get to this in just a second, through what we call a sinkhole, we were actually able to get clear visibility of the number of infected systems across the world. Now, I've said 300,000 plus victims that we know of. I believe the figure is somewhere in the region of 365,000 as a minimum that were infected. And when you think about that, that's quite a significant number, certainly in terms of the amount of time that we're talking about. I mean, this wasn't over a 3, 6, 12-month period. This was really fast, and it spread, well, like a worm. So in many cases, WannaCry is not, I think the term ransomware is being used, which is a relatively new term. This is not done through typical ransomware variants in terms of sending emails and taking time to infect. This was done relatively quickly. And another key difference here is that, historically ransomware would be targeting consumers, but and then of course there was a slight change over the last 18 months in which we saw ransomware attacks going and targeting businesses. What this was pretty indiscriminate. It was ranging from individuals also to organizations as well, as we saw. And as you can see, India itself was particularly hard hit as well. So how did it spread? I mean, what was the reason for it? And what it was looking for was, it was probing for something that we call double pulsar, which is an exploit that got leaked a few months ago. And systems that weren't patched with a Microsoft patch MS17010, which I believe was, I think it was March or April, I think it was probably March. Systems that weren't patched obviously became particularly vulnerable. Now, let me just touch on the patching element just very briefly. You may have seen a lot of discussions about Windows XP. And just to put this, and I think just to set the record straight, Windows XP was not the only operating system that was impacted. In fact, it was multiple Windows operating systems that were impacted. But the reason that Windows XP is talked about so much was because Windows XP went end of life in 2014, which basically means that Microsoft is saying that we're not going to make patches available for you because the operating system is, what is it, 14, 15 years old? I mean, it's quite old anyway. And we see that a lot. So I think Windows Vista went end of life just recently. Now, obviously, we've got Windows XP that went end of life just before that. So subsequently, what that means is that if you're running on these operating systems, then these patches won't be available. So the question of, well, do you patch or do you not patch is almost irrelevant with Windows XP, for example, and now Windows Vista, because of course patches aren't being made available for these operating systems. Now, of course, patching still is a key issue, and what we recognize with, I think certainly what WannaCry has shown us, is that there are still multiple organizations out there and multiple systems out there that obviously haven't been keeping up to date with patches. And this is not new, by the way. You know, I think 12 to 14 years ago, odd, when we had the NIMDA worm, you know, the time lag between when the patch was available to when the worm came out was in order of magnitude of, I think it was 14 to 16 months, but it was a considerably long period. So, you know, good cyber hygiene, we always talk about being the best form of defense. And in this particular case, that absolutely would have been the best form of defense. You know, having up-to-date patched systems, plus in addition to that, having backups of your key data. Now, I realize and I recognize that there's been a lot of discussion about, you know, why aren't organizations patching? Why aren't organizations upgrading their operating systems? And it's not as simple as saying, well, you need to update your patches. The reality is that there are pressures within environments. So, for example, you know, if you're going to be rolling out patches for your entire environment, you want to be able to test that. You want to be able to make sure that the applications are going to continue to work. So it's not like a home computer where you can just say automatic updates and just hope that it works or hope that there's no issues. Actually, you need to do regular testing to make sure that there is no impact. Equally, and I think certainly for some organizations, you can talk about health or critical infrastructure. You know, the reason that they're using operating systems such as Windows XP is because a lot of the applications that they use will only work on Windows XP, for example. And so, you know, migrating to a new operating system isn't just a simple case of putting a CD in. Well, I don't know if we do that anymore. Now, one of the interesting parts of this particular attack was, obviously, there were at some point over Friday, I think it was on Friday, we kind of, the spread of the malware kind of almost halted almost immediately. And there was a reason for that, because there is what we call a kill switch. Now, the way that the malware was configured was, it would do a check, and it wanted to determine whether it was in what we call a sandbox. So basically, when we as a company, you know, get ransom or any malware samples, we put it in an environment where we want to look at it. And we want to put it in this particular environment, but we want to actually make sure that it's in a safe environment. We're not going to put it on my home computer, for example. So when we put it into this particular sandbox, it allows us the ability to be able to analyze the malware, but to do so in a safe fashion. Now, of course, the malware authors are aware that that's the techniques that we use. So what they wanted to do is they wanted to say, well, look, is there any way that we can make sure that if somebody has our ransomware or has our, you know, has this particular malware, is there any way that we can make sure that, you know, we're not in this particular sandbox? So what they did was they would do a call to a domain. Now, this particular domain, if it wasn't registered, and if there wasn't a response back, in other words, if it says, hi, you know, it sends a beacon out to this particular domain, and if there's no response, then of course they assume that they're not in a sandbox, and then they can continue with the infection. Because, you know, sandboxes by and large would be set up in such a way that there is a response. We're fortunate in that a malware researcher was able to register that particular domain, which obviously meant that a connection would then come back. But just to put this into perspective, you know, and I know for many of you this is probably maybe kind of going in the weeds, but the reason I wanted to focus upon this is and I wanted to discuss this in particular, was it wasn't the usual way of sending emails to people. You know, it was actually using an SMB connection, which is what we used for the majority, or what we use for file print sharing and so forth. And I know many of you may say, well, okay, you know what? Our SMB ports, in other words, that particular service isn't accessible to the internet. So in other words, we have it behind firewalls, we're protected. But you have to remember that, you know, this worm was spreading within internal networks. You know, there would be and this is something we need to validate, but our assumption is at some point it got inside the network, and then once it was in the network, it then wreaked absolute havoc, and it just spread like wildfire. So this was not, you know, this is not a case of setting up more firewalls per se, but I think this does make the case for having things like segmented networks. In other words, you know, if you see these things happening, having kind of like isolating your network so it doesn't spread as significantly as what this did. Now, here's the interesting part. By the way, this number is actually incorrect, but within the wallet, within the malware, what we realized was the bad guys had 3 Bitcoin wallets. Now, Bitcoin is a virtual currency that we've been seeing for use of payments, in particular in terms of ransomware. But by the way, it's not the only mechanism being used for criminal payments, but certainly for WannaCry, what they did was they hard-coded 3 wallets in the malware itself. Now, I think I put this together, I think it was day before, just yesterday. I just did a check just now, but the 3 wallets associated with WannaCry have just in excess of $90,000 US dollars with 288 transactions. What does that mean in English? Well, there are people that had this ransomware and that have paid. But here's the key, and I think here's the interesting part, is that as of now, we haven't really, and we've heard actually 1 or 2 cases in which people claim to have had their data back after paying the ransom, which of course is fantastic news for those individuals. But again, it's not, it needs to be validated. But the other individuals haven't had, or certainly the other people haven't had their data sent back to them. But the interesting part is, and actually, I suspect we're in the process of doing further research in this space. But generally speaking, the way that ransomware works is, I infect your computer, you pay me a ransom, I give you your data back. That's generally the way that it works. But with this, actually, that doesn't seem to be what's happening. And I'll explain very briefly why. I mean, one of the other variants that we saw, actually, this is a relatively old one, but I want to put this into perspective. CryptoWall version 3 had netted somewhere in the region of $300 to $600 million. And there were 406,000 infections, which is significant. But of course, with WannaCry, there's been talk about an error being made in the code. And what that error kind of pertains to is, when you make a Bitcoin payment, there should be an identifier. In other words, it should be able to say, hey, Raj has just paid me $300 worth of Bitcoin. I know it's Raj, give Raj his data back. But in the way that this was coded, there wasn't, and certainly from what we can see, there doesn't appear to be any mechanism to be able to say, Raj has got paid the ransom. And so we kind of, and at the moment, we're kind of questioning, well, okay, why did that happen? And at the moment, there's a lot of speculation, which was, they actually made an error. But what I would suggest is just keep close to the research that we're publishing, because we are planning to produce additional content about this particular issue. Because of course, why would you go to all of this trouble about creating a wonderfully impactful delivery mechanism for ransomware, and then actually make such a mistake in which the payment and actually the ransom element doesn't work? And so I think that's a really big question that we're asking ourselves. So what do we do, and how can we, and what's the advice that we have? I'm not going to sit here and give you a laundry list of things that you need to do, because actually in many cases, many of you already know that. But what I did want to share with you is, we launched an initiative last year with the Dutch police, the European Cybercrime Center at Kaspersky Lab, called No More Ransom. And we launched it because we anticipated the growth of ransomware actually spreading far and wide. So this is an initiative that we launched, and what we do is anybody can go. You don't have to be a customer. And now we've got law enforcement agencies and companies all across the world. They're free to join, obviously, and we'll tell victims what ransomware that they're infected with. And whenever we do takedowns of ransomware infrastructures or are able to create free tools, we actually give people free decryptors. Now, on the site itself, and if you go there now, it's called nomoreransom.org, there is a link now to WannaCry. And in that, we've actually got some advice that people can use in the event of, well, not just WannaCry, but actually other ransomware variants. If we have the keys or we're able to decrypt the data, we will also give you the tools as well so you can decrypt your data. Now, I do want to be clear here. As of now, there doesn't appear to, well, sorry. As of now, there is no decryptor for WannaCry ransomware. Now that's to a degree true. We received information in the last 24 hours that there is a independent researcher that has produced a decryptor for WannaCry ransomware, and apparently it's been validated as working against Windows XP. It's irony there. We are hearing, we're currently confirming now. We've just tested it against Windows 7. We've been told it does work against Windows 7, but we've not managed to replicate that right now. So we're just having a look through that. So we are currently looking at the research that's been published about the WannaCry decryption capability, and certainly, obviously, once it's obviously confirmed as validated, we'll be able to make that available. Now, it's not a decryptor in the way that these particular tools work. In this particular tools, we've actually got the private keys, in other words, the unlocking keys. In this particular instance, we haven't found where those decrypting keys are. But what I would suggest is that, you know, whether it's WannaCry or whether it's Shade or Tesla Crypt or Chimera or CoinVault or Rana, if you want to stay up to date with what the private sector and what law enforcement are doing in terms of fighting back against ransomware, this is absolutely the site to go. And it's free to use, it's free to access. And what we've noticed, certainly over the last few days, is that, you know, WannaCry has generated a great deal of interest. Indeed, you know, this is the number of requests, HTTP requests that we've had on the site, and HTTPS requests. And as you can see, you know, we generally operate at around about 400,000 HTTP requests a day. When WannaCry hit, and at its peak, we were hitting about 8 million requests a day. So there's been a great deal of interest, and of course the whole world is now looking at ransomware as the issue. And the good news is that we actually now have, well, not now, but certainly since last year, we've actually created a portal where anybody can go to. They can not only learn about what ransomware is, they can have preventative advice against general ransomware, advice about WannaCry, and also if we are successful in being able to, I guess, decrypt the data and create a tool for that, we will make it immediately available on nomoreransom.org. Of course, we do anticipate and we do predict that we have a great deal of IPs that are trying to disrupt the site. You know, this particular one at the top was sent 615,449 errors, in other words, security events, as attempts to try to disrupt the site. So we are aware that the site itself is a target for criminals, I guess you could say, in an attempt to try to disrupt it. Since launch, we've managed to decrypt 10,000 computers, or actually just over 10,000 computers. So it's been hugely successful, and it's actually made a direct impact in terms of the bottom line for victims, bottom line for criminals as well. And of course, we've got individuals, criminals themselves, who are actually creating ransomware called No More Ransom as well. So I'm going to just briefly pause for a second, and I did want to share with you and I'm going to stay here for a second because I think it's important that you know where to go to get technical indicators and details. So the first one is the one that myself and my lead researcher, my lead scientist, Christian Beek, and Charles McFarlane put together. This is actually something that we put together, I think almost, I would say, within hours of the initial outbreak. And what we wanted to do in this particular initial blog was we wanted to tell people what the ransomware is, how it works, but in addition to that, some indicators of compromise. In other words, what addresses is it coming, or not what addresses is it coming from? What I mean is what are the Bitcoin wallets, or tell me more about the technical indicators so that I can better try to reduce the impact in the event that I'm compromised. And so the first blog, I think, would be the first place to go, certainly from a SOC perspective, and certainly from a technical perspective. That's where you need to go. If you are coming from a policy perspective, then I would recommend the second blog as well. The second blog itself really begins to describe what I was talking about earlier, which was the fact that this was a worm-like capability and why this is so different. So it's probably more of an executive perspective. And then, of course, we have a SOC perspective, what it actually means from a secure operations center, and a detailed technical analysis as well. The detailed technical analysis actually came out from our labs teams. I think it was on the Sunday, but it really begins to break down and detail more about more about the SMB exploit, more about the spread of infection. And that's going to be particularly relevant for those of you that are actually managing and monitoring networks internally. What I talk about is the need to be able to have segmentation. What we talk about is, in addition to that, many of you that are running networks that have connections to third parties through VPN capability or whatever, trying to make sure that you can reduce the likelihood of these connected networks being able to spread malware, of course, would be key. And so, I think all of these are 4 key resources, dependent upon your perspective, that I would highly recommend. Not just because I wrote one of them, and not just because my boss wrote another, and not just because the rest of the McAfee Labs teams wrote the others, but genuinely these are very valuable resources that you can use. We are publishing research all of the time on this. I mean, this is very much a work in progress. We are working to try to identify, I guess, the order by which independent regions and geographies were compromised, such that we can try to determine the process flow, the flows by which this ransomware or ransomware actually spread. But not only that, I do want to share one thing with you as well, actually. But also, we have created a recovery method as well. Now, I'm just going to briefly explain what that is. Yesterday, we published a blog on SC Magazine, and it's on my Twitter feed as well, so you can freely access that. Right now, if you've been impacted with WannaCry and you can't restore your data, if your computer has been rebooted, it looks like the decryption tool that we've picked up probably wouldn't work for you. So right now, the only mechanism available for you is what we can see is what we call a data carving method. And the data carving method is a forensic capability that we've identified as being relatively successful in terms of recovering the data. So if you have lost data and you don't have access to that, then there is the ability for you to be able to get that back. Now, I'm just going to, and you have to pardon me just for a second, but let me get this. Let me just get this for you. Okay, pardon me. I'm just going to get this blog up for you, and then obviously you have the URL. Okay, thank you for the comments. Okay. Okay. Here we go. Okay, so this is a recovery technique. Now, I do want to warn you here, this is not something that I would recommend your mother and father do, right? This is, if your organization has been hit, my hope is that, you've got a forensic team on site. They will probably know about the mechanisms that we have here. But there is a technique where you can use file carving for file recovery. Now, I will be brutally honest, it's been inconsistent in the results that we've had. In some instances, what we realized was we actually got full recovery, which was fantastic. But these are the techniques. But in other cases, we didn't get full recovery. In other cases, we had near zero. Actually, sorry, let me put the link back up so you have it. But like I said, I did tweet it out yesterday, and so you can do it. And please do me a favor, if you are on Twitter, please tweet this, please tweet it, please communicate this out to the world, because quite frankly, right now, if you don't have the ability to restore, then you've lost your data for good. So this right now is, from what I can see, one of the only mechanisms available towards getting your data back. And this is not a product, by the way. We're not trying to sell anything. It's a free tool called PhotoRec or Photo Recovery that you can use to get your data back. So, if you're impacted, feel free to use it, but please liaise with your technical teams. If you're not impacted, then please communicate that, share that out to the world at large. I think it's useful for them to be able to do that. We are obviously focusing upon, the ability to be able to create, I think, more functioning decryption tools, like you saw with No More Ransom. But at the present moment in time, the only recovery method, well, actually, that's not entirely true. One of the only recovery methods we've seen is this data file carving mechanism. There is another one that was released by Telefonica yesterday as well, and I just posted that out as well. It's actually in Spanish. It has a video, and it's really great work by the Telefonica team as well. But like I said, if you want to stay up to date with this investigation, if you want to stay up to date with ransomware, if you want to stay up to date with malware, you want to be better prepared, or have faster access to the work and the work that our team are doing, then Twitter is the best avenue. And it's not just myself. You saw the tweet from one of my lead analysts, Christian Beek, and I should probably put his handle up there as well. Follow us, McAfee Labs, McAfee, myself, Christian Beek. We as soon as we get information, we promise to make that available for you. The best way that you can stay protected against WannaCry, or the best way that you can stay protected against all forms of ransomware, I would suggest, is being up to speed with the latest information that's coming out. I think it's great that you guys have got this webinar set up a week after, but for some of you, a week is too late. So if you want to get information in real time, right now, that's the best advice I could give you is, social media has been a really great avenue towards getting really rapid information. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed that. And I think I've got some questions, so I will answer that.
Thank you, Raj, for giving a wonderful presentation. There are so many questions is there in the Q&A section, and also some participants have raised questions in the chat also. If you make out some time and see some relevant questions which you would like to answer, it will be wonderful.
Okay. Yeah. So depend. You're right. I mean, that's the challenge that we face, is that and actually we kind of fall into that trap as well. Was actually you saw me with TweetDeck up earlier. As it was breaking, I actually had a separate screen with TweetDeck, and there was just so much information with WannaCry. There was information coming from multiple sources, like, this is a spear phishing attack, don't open up emails. In fact, even on on the BBC, when the story came out, there was a ton of detail about people making claims that it was through spear phishing. What I would recommend in this particular instance is that there are individuals that we kind of follow to get a more relative feed about, or a more accurate feed. There are individuals, say for example with Kaspersky, for example, Kostin would be one person, Miko at F-Secure, there's myself, and so I think the key thing here is that you have the ability to be able to control your information flow. And so I think what you need to do is be quite specific about the types of people that you follow, and look at the information that they're presenting. I mean, there's been so much misinformation spread through social media, but I generally don't see a lot of fake news, because that's why I follow certain people. So I think it's up to you to follow those types of organizations. And where do you go for such messages? Where do you go for such content? Without shadow of a doubt, look at the big security companies. And there are some really good news outlets and news channels as well that you can use. But look, if you get stuck, just ask me and I'll just have a look at the people that I follow. Actually, that would be a good way. Amit, so what I'll do is, in fact, if you go back to the, let me go back for you here. The detailed technical analysis there. If you need any more details about the spread of infection, that's the place for you to go. It's a really lengthy piece. I know the team spent a lot of time in terms of developing that. Okay, so Deepinder again. Well, you know, I think you make the assumption. Well, okay. I'm guesstimating here. By the way, there's no evidence of this, but let's forget about the identification. Let's forget about all of these various different things. But you know, isn't that something you would fix straight away? I mean, you know, we've seen countless ransomware variants. I think we're in the hundreds now of various different ransomware families. They've got no issues with regards to identifying the identifier. So we're currently exploring that particular technique. Thank you, anonymous attendee. Pardeep, yes, absolutely. Technical data recovery through forensic tools. It is there for sure. Okay, so if the spread of this ransomware is remote execution, it need not come through email attachment, and thus advising to not open unreliable emails and attachments and not use pen drives. Yeah, so I think in answer to your first question, you know, I think you're correct. I mean, fundamentally, the best form of defense against any form of cyber attack is good cyber hygiene. And so we talk about things like, you know, don't open, like I'll give you a great example. My mum is like the worst example of cyber hygiene. She opens every email, clicks on every link, anything that comes through, she clicks onto it. And actually, I genuinely feel that, you know, good cyber hygiene still goes a long way towards reducing the risk to organizations. And so, you know, okay, we talk about patching, we talk about other things. So yeah, I think you're right. The sinkhole update for the spread of this ransomware, you know, bear in mind the sinkhole data that I presented to you, it's only a snapshot. And so I think what needs to be done, in fact, what I would recommend is about 3 to 4 days ago, let me see if I can vote. No. Okay, it's worth a try. So I actually, the sinkhole data is actually live. You can actually access that. You can actually view that yourself. So I think it was a few days ago, Malware Tech blog has actually made access to the sinkhole accessible to you. So if you wanted to actually get more up-to-date data and more historical data about the method and scale of infection in India, then absolutely you can do that. And again, you know, what are why do we see black spots in geography? That's something that we're exploring right now. But you know, Russia was hit, China was hit, Australia were hit. But equally, there are some areas where it was less than, say, for example, other regions. So we're currently exploring and trying to target that. In terms of question number 4, so we're developing another blog right now, which actually talks about the unique identification of the ransomware victims. You know, interestingly enough, when you click on Contact Us, the unique identifiers are there. So if you try to talk or contact the bad guys, they can identify you. But if you pay the ransom, they can't. So we've got the screenshots now. We're putting a blog together that basically talks about some of these issues. Okay, Santosh. Okay, so this is the recovery mechanisms and recovery method. We've actually the removal of the ransomware, we've actually got the detection capabilities in all of our particular products. And you know what we have is we've got, and I think it was in the detailed technical analysis, but I will check. But we've got, and maybe even in the initial blog with IOCs, but we've got all of the details of the malware, what it does, what it modifies, and so forth. So we can share that with you if Bitcoin, telecom, or other important systems might be similar weaknesses. Well, Bitcoin is a decentralized mechanism, so I'm not sure that necessarily applies. I mean, look, you know, Windows. So everyone's complaining about Windows XP and saying the NHS should have upgraded. Windows XP is the third most common operating system in the world. It's used in the majority of critical infrastructure. In fact, you know, any of you that are working in the Indian critical infrastructure environment, invite me and my team, and we'll be able to show you the potential vulnerability for your environment. So, you know, 95% of cache points actually run it. So, you know, the truth and the reality is that, you know, there are vulnerable systems all across the world, and that's all these bad guys are doing. You know, they're just finding these vulnerable systems and using exploits against it. We've got the code and everything in a controlled environment, so we're good. Question 7, I think I answered. Question 8, no, it's SMB, so it's Windows only. Yes, data freeware recovery through PhotoRec is actually on the website. The PowerPoint, you know, I need to clean it up. I'll be honest. I got asked to do this 2 days ago, and I've been a little bit swamped. So what I will do, in fact, let me sync up with the Digital India team. What I'd like to be able to do is actually spend a bit of time and actually create a slide deck that is. I don't want to use the word better because that suggests that what I've got isn't good enough, but I'd want to spend a bit more time on it. So if you bear with me, we'll produce a slide deck for you that I think has the better polish, and then of course we can make it available for you as well. Okay, so double pulsar is part of the Eternal Blue. Best free antivirus. Yeah, I work for McAfee, so I think you know what my answer to that question is. Okay, so actually, Shukesh, SMB operates on port 445. So Party, tool of recovering the data. So we've had inconsistent results. Windows XP 32, so 32-bit operating systems, we've had a relatively good success rate. I think 64 was actually, I can't remember, actually we had a change on that, but Windows XP, Windows 7, Windows 10 have been pretty good. Windows 32-bit operating systems have been really good for recovery. But actually, in many cases, the carving mechanism has been largely driven by other environmental factors. And unfortunately, we haven't had the time to kind of, you know, go through all of the mechanisms. But what I would say is the amount of free space that you had was a key indicator towards the amount of data that was recovered. But look, if you've got a restore, use the restore. If you don't have a restore and you've lost your data and you want to get your data back, you know, what have you got to lose? That was our kind of feeling. And, you know, we did debate actually over a couple of days, like, do we release this or not? Because I know there's going to be people that are going to say, well, Raj, thanks very much for your advice, and it didn't work. But honestly, right now, it's one of the only mechanisms that you have. Is Windows Defender a good security solution? Dude, I work for McAfee. So, yeah, you know my answer. We're unable to deploy patches on a few machines. Well, you know, I think this is a key point, Mohan, actually. You know, this is why we have things like compensating controls. Compensating controls allows you the ability to be able to say, well, okay, like let's say, for example, we have an end-of-life operating system. Is there the ability for us to be able to have compensating controls? So in other words, okay, we can't apply the patch, but what we'll do is we'll reduce the risk by putting in, I don't know, we will only restrict access to the system to Y, or we'll use whitelisting and so forth. And I think this is a key area of discussion, because, you know, people have said, well, okay, upgrade Windows XP. Well, okay, Windows XP may not be able to be upgraded, or upgrade Windows Vista. Well, that may not be a possibility because you've got applications that require that. And so that's where, you know, the information risk and information security function should come in, identify the vulnerabilities, identify the risk, and then actually put in controls to be able to reduce that risk. So I think that's very key. How does it spread and which mechanisms? I think I discussed that as well. So Pranay, yeah, so that's the right thing to do, because I mean, I'm surprised. I mean, you look on Shodan, there's like, you know, over 1 million systems that have port 445 open. But bear in mind, inside your network, you have port 445 open, right? So if you have, let's say, for example, a VPN with another company, well, it could have come in that way. You know, that's been, I think, one of the biggest issues. So most of the companies that have been hit and have had thousands of systems taken down, they don't have SMB externally accessible. But the way that they would, my understanding was, the way that some of them got in was they had obviously, you know, a connection with other organizations, and so that's how it came in. So I think it's the sensible approach that you've taken, but actually ask yourself a question: if one computer in my network gets compromised, does it then spread like wildfire and take everything else out, or do I have segregation and segmentation in my network through zone segmentation and so forth? And I think that would have at least reduced or slowed down the spread. And so I think what you've done is wise, but I think there is a way to do more. Is there any ransomware decryption tools to recover my files? Absolutely. No More Ransom has over 40 tools to decrypt data. But of course, you have to recognize that right now, a decryption tool for WannaCry on No More Ransom doesn't exist. We are aware of a potential mechanism that's just been released, so we're currently looking through that as we speak. What about embedded devices and firmware? Well, again, the operating systems for the MS17010 patch is there. How far? So Ravi, it's like I said, inconsistent. You know, if you've got nothing else, give it a go. Best practice. So we put a lot of the content around best practices, including there. Yes, the Anjan. So the onion domains and the IOC and everything that we have about the IOCs is in the first blog there. Any simple preventative measures? Yeah, I mean, look, you know, I think it's cyber hygiene. It's, you know, don't click on open emails, have an up-to-date firewall, up-to-date security software. But we've got a lot of that advice on No More Ransom, so you can point people to that site. I'm not sure I understand your question, Nilesh. Yes, Tejas, absolutely. But of course, that wouldn't have prevented you against WannaCry. Can you suggest free open the? I don't know. Let me come back to you. Data centers. Yeah, I would have zones, and I think, how long have I got? I've got like 4 minutes. So, best practice guide to safeguard your data centers. Let me sync up with the digital. Actually, maybe Digital India team. Maybe you can go through some of the questions. That doesn't impact Mac. What precautions does McAfee have? We've got details within the blogs there. Okay, all right. Okay, so I'm not going to answer all those questions. I think I'm going to be running out of time. Maybe Digital India team, if you can kind of summarize the questions that I didn't answer, and because I know there's a lot of repetition on those questions, and I know there's a request for further data as well. So maybe what we do is we sync up, and I give you those tools, the papers, the tools, and maybe that can be sent out to all of the attendees as well. And anything new that we get, like I said, you know, I will post it here straight away as well. So look, with that, thank you very much for your time. I'm sorry I couldn't get to all of the questions, but I know there's a ton of questions out there. So listen, thank you for your time very much, and we'll make sure we'll work with the Digital India team and obviously get the information to you in due course. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj, for the wonderful and very nice session. I request the participants to be a little patient. All the questions, as Raj said, we will collect all your questions, segregate. We will send it to Raj for evaluation, and once he reverts back with answer, we will post all these questions and answers in our KMS portal. Please visit the negd.kms.in, this website. You can able to get all the question and answer. Many participants asked questions about PPT. PPT also will be made available to all of you through our KMS portal. That is same NEGD KMS portal is available. There you can download it. And I also request participants to watch who more missed the initial part. They can able to watch through YouTube link, as well as in LMS portal of NEGD also, where we kept this recording session in podcast. So over to you, Shalini. Any instruction you want to share?
Thanks, Shilu. I'd like to thank Raj. Thank you so much for your valuable time and sharing the ways to address the challenge of the current hour. Thank you so much all the participants for taking out time and participating for this webinar. As Shilu shared, the information and the podcast will be available on LMS, and all the relevant answers which we were not able to answer right now will be answered through KMS and LMS both. Good day, good evening.